So let's say that you're looking at number 1. Okay, so take a look at the first one. The first thing I'm going to have you do is label your A, your B, and your C. So my A is here, my B is here, my C is here. So, it's okay. So my A is a 3. My B is a 4. Is that correct?
No.
Nope. What is it? -4. Make sure you take the negative with it. And then my C is going to be a -1. So we're going to do our equation starting right here. You're putting a number in each of the letter spots. So I'm going to start right here with x equals -b. What's my B? -4 plus or minus. Then I have my big square root. Then I'm going to have b squared, which is -4 squared, minus 4ac. And then in my A, I'm going to put the number 3. In my C, I'm going to put the number -1. Then all of that is over to A, where A is 3. Okay, so before you pull out a calculator, there are some easy things that we can cross out. The minus a negative here, what can that turn into? Okay, just a regular +4. Plus or minus. Then under here, -4 squared, how much is that? -4 squared is -4 times -4, so that's 16. And then in here I have -4 times 3 times -1. What would that be if I times those 3 together? Okay, negative here and negative here, that's really a plus. And then 4 times 3 is 12. On the bottom, 2 times 3 is a 6. Okay, one more step from there. So I would finish it off with 4 plus or minus. 16 and 12 makes how many? 28 over 6. Okay, so as far as your test for tomorrow, that's good enough. Okay, but SAT and ACT, they're going to make you reduce that radical. Okay, this is geometry and algebra 2. So if you don't remember, I'm going to show you how to do it. But out of all of my perfect squares, what can 28 divide by? I multiplied the -1 and the -4, and they became positive. So I'm multiplying those. So 4 times 3 is 12, times 1 is still 12. Okay, so what perfect square can 28 divide by? 4. Okay, now what's the square root of 4? 2. So if I couldn't square root it, I wouldn't try to split it up. But 4 is a perfect square. So what I would do is take my root 28 here, and I would split that up into 4 times 7. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, the square root of 4 we said is 2, so I can write it like this. 4 plus or minus 2 root 7 over 6. Everybody good to there? Okay, and then there's one more step. If all of these numbers are even, then the last step that you could do is basically reduce those. If all 3 of them can divide by 2, and I do it, what will my final answer be? My 4 is now a 2 plus or minus. My 2 is now a 1 square root 7. And then my 6 on the bottom is a 3. So I'm going to put for your test tomorrow, that's good enough. But if you're taking ACT, SAT, any of those guys, they would never leave it like that. They'd make you pull out the perfect square and then reduce. Okay? So for me, this is fine. Your test tomorrow is all multiple choice. Okay, so that should hopefully make it a little bit easier for you to know if you're doing it right. Okay, go to number 2. Okay, so at the top, we're going to write our letters. A, B, C. My A is a 2. My B is a 4. My C is a 2. So, X equals. And then remember, you're just following this formula here at the top. Negative B, what's my B? 4 plus or minus square root. B squared, my B is a 4, so 4 squared minus 4 times A times C My A is a 2, my C is also a 2. Then on the bottom, divide by 2A, which is 2 times 2. Okay, then from there, I'm going to look for the easy stuff that I can cross out if I have to. So in here, what is 4 squared? 16. And what is 4 times 2? 8 times 2 again? 16. So what I have is negative 4 plus or minus 16 minus 16. And then on the bottom, 2 times 2 is another 4. Okay, but I want you to think about if it's 16 minus 16, what's that going to come out to be? 0. And if that's 0, then it doesn't matter if I add or subtract 0. I'm going to end up with just negative 4 over 4 because that comes out to be 0. And negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1. Okay?
Yes.
So, what you should have learned when you covered this is that there's a special part of the formula that's called the discriminant. And the discriminant will tell you how many answers you're going to get. So, it's the part under the square root sign. So, the discriminant is just going to be b squared minus 4ac. So, what I'm going to do from here on out is we're going to find that little chunk first, and then we're going to know how many answers we're going to get. So, right here, if d is 0, like it was in problem number 2, remember I ended up with a 0 on the inside. Okay, then I'm going to get only one answer. Here, what was my only answer? Negative 1. So if your discriminant is 0 under the square root sign, you're going to get only one answer. If your discriminant is a perfect square, then you're going to get 2 rational answers. What that means is that you can reduce the square root. If it's positive but not a perfect square, okay, then you can usually get 2 irrational answers, which means that you can partially reduce, which is like what we did on number 1. So that says partially reduce the square root. Okay, but then if it comes out to be negative, you're going to have, does anybody remember what happens if you're square rooting a negative? What kind of number it is? Thank you.
Huh? Oh, all of them.
No, it's going to have an I in it. Do you remember what the I stands for?
Imaginary.
Imaginary, very good. Now, we're going to come back to the imaginary in a second. We're going to flip over and do one more where it comes out to be a perfect square root. So, if you will, please, what number is it? Number 5 off the back. Flip over to the back side for me. Oh, you will get to, oops, hold on. These are backwards. My bad, flip those. Okay, if you get a negative, you'll get 2 imaginary. Those are backwards, sorry. Okay, so when you're ready, flip over. We're going to do number 5 off the back side. There's only one thing that's really different from when you covered this in Algebra 2 to when you're covering it now. So if you look at number 5, what kind of function is number 5? Okay, it's quadratic if the highest power is an x squared. That's an x cubed. Okay, but we can still do it with quadratic formula. How could I pull the extra t or x or whatever letter you want to use? How could I pull that out? Okay, good. I'm going to divide by what's the GCF? 2t. Now, if you like x better, totally don't care. Switch it to an x and that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to switch it to an x right now because I don't want that to confuse anybody. But it's just a 2x, and then what would be left over? Okay, x squared. And then minus what's 40t divided by 2t? It'd just be a 20. Now, usually I would try to square root this, but the problem is you can't square root 20. So if factoring doesn't work, then you're going to use quadratic formula. So I'm going to rewrite it like this. 2x, x squared plus 0x minus 20. A, B, C. So if one of your terms is missing, you're just going to put a 0 in that spot. label your ABC, and then do quadratic formula. So my A is what number if nothing's there? What should I put here? A 1. So I'm going to do x equals negative b, what's my b though? 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then all divided by 2a, and a was a 1. Now, 0 squared is going to just basically cross out in there. What is negative 4 times 1? Negative 4. Now times that by negative 20. What do you get? Now, positive or negative? Careful on that. Positive. So I'd have 0 plus or minus root 80 over 2 times 1 is 2. Now, at this point, for my test, this is good enough. Okay, but most of you guys are taking ACT, SAT, and you're doing it this year, so we're going to reduce that. What perfect square can 80 break down into? Okay, 4 is a good one, but there's a bigger one. Okay, I can divide 80 by 16. So I would break that down into 16 times 5. And then what's the square root of 16? 4. So I'd have 0 plus or minus 4 root 5 over 2. Now again, for joiner's test, okay, that's perfect. Leave it like that. I totally don't care. But for ACT, SAT, they're going to pull that 16 out to the front, square root it on its own. The square root of 16 gives me a 4 root 5. And then when I come back to my formula, what do you notice about 4 and 2 here? They can both divide by what? They can both divide by 2. Now, technically, if that's a 0, can that divide by whatever I want? Sure. Okay, what's 0 divided by 2? Still a 0. What's 2 in the front divided by 2? Or I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 4 in the front divided by 2. 2 root 5. And then on the bottom, that was a 2 divided by 2, so that could turn into a 1. Now, as far as answers go, would I have to put a divided by 1 at the bottom here? No. Now, there's a third answer that I'm going to review with you how to get. So I'm going to have positive 2 root 5 over 1, nobody cares. Okay, then negative 2 root 5 over 1, nobody cares. The third answer comes from me putting this 2x in the front. Do you remember what it is when you pull an x to the outside? What answer goes with that? 0. So there is one question on your homework where x is cubed. Remember, cubed means there should be 3 answers. So you get the plus or minus from the formula. But then this extra 0 from here comes from the 2x on the outside. And so remember, that 2x gives me a third answer. And I think on the homework it's number 3. So if you want to put a mark on it, number 3, you should have 3 answers. Okay, so flip back over to the front. We're going to practice with some imaginaries, and then we will be done. Okay, so flip back over to the front. Look at the bottom row. What is the square root of 25? Usually it's 5. What's the square root of negative 25? Okay, this is what you would do. You do 25 times negative 1. And then if you remember from Algebra 2, ki is the square root of negative 1. So whenever I break down a negative 1 square root, I put an I in that spot. So from here, what's the square root of 25 we said? 5. And then what's the square root of negative 1? I. So it'd be 5i. Okay, look at the one right next to it. 64. I can break that down into 64 times negative 1. What's the square root of 64 from here? 8. And then what's the square root of negative 1? I. Now, if I have 8 not in the square root anymore, now I can times it with the 2. 2 times 8 is 16i. Okay, then last one like that. Look at that one. We have an x squared, square root both sides. Yep, and you would get the square root of 16 times the square root of negative 1. But then remember, square root of 16 is regular, square root of 16 is 4, and then the square root of negative 1 is I. So basically I would just think about, technically it should be plus or minus since we square rooted. Okay, but whenever you square root a negative, you're going to take the normal root, you're just going to pop a little I behind it if it was negative. So flip over to the back side for me, please. We're going to do number 3. Okay, label your A, B, C on number 3. A, B, C. And then I'm going to list out my values down the side. Now, A, there's not a number there. That means A is really a what? 1. So, A is 1. B is 2. Negative 2. And C is 17. So, I'm going to follow my formula from the front. You can flip back over and look at yours if you need to. It's negative B, which was a negative 2 plus or minus, square root, B squared, which was my negative 2 squared, minus 4 times A times C. All of that divided by 2A. A is a 1. Now, from here, this is where, if you try to just type that whole thing into your calculator, it's going to end up giving you an error if the answer is imaginary. So, what I want you to do instead is, you're going to type it in 2 pieces. Just type this part in for now, not the square root, just the middle part. Okay, so I'll highlight it for you on here, what I mean. But you're only going to type in the discriminant, not the square root. No square root, just the inside. So I'll do negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 17, just like that. Okay, if it comes out negative, your calculator is going to give you an error. So you can't do that. So I'm going to rewrite my answer. Now, what about these double negatives here in the front? They turn positive. So really, I have regular 2 plus or minus negative 64. And then on the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, but then this is where the calculator at this point, once there's a negative under that square root, it's going to tell you error. So you just have to reduce this part using your eyes. What's the square root of regular 64? 8. What's the square root of negative 64? 8i. So you would take that guy, make it 64 times negative 1. Square root of 64 is I, or I'm sorry, 8, square root of negative 1 is I. So it'll be 2 plus or minus 8i over 2. Now, for me that's good enough, but on SAT, ACT, if these guys are all even, what are they going to do? Reduce them all. What can they all divide by? 2, yeah. So, huh? Yeah, I typed it into the calculator here. So I typed in all of that stuff right here. That's why I replaced it with a negative 64. Okay, did you put parentheses around your negative 2? And then did you check your parentheses, make sure they look like that? Squared on the inside. Yeah, that's a good point, guys. On this, you do have to put the squared on the outside. Otherwise, it gives you like 70 something, and that's not right. So make sure if it's a negative base, you put the parentheses around the base and then the squared on the outside. Okay? So my answer there, I'm going to divide all these numbers by 2 here. And then that is now a 1 plus or minus 4i. Technically, it's over 1, but you wouldn't have to put the 1 if you don't want to. Okay, that is very similar. There are only 2 questions on this tomorrow. One of them's just like that. It's a perfect square. It just happens to have a negative. Don't forget to put the I in there. Okay, we're going to do one more. We're going to do number 6. Okay, so first thing, number 6, what do you notice both of your numbers have? They both have an x. Yeah, so when I reduce, you can choose not to put the 1. Since it's divided by 1, you don't really need it. 64, the square root is 8. And then since it was negative, you put an I with it. Correct. Okay, so take the x out to the front. What's going to be left over for number 6? Out of the x cubed, now it's an x squared. And out of the 9x, now it's just a plus 9. Now, that almost looks like perfect squares, but you can only do that shortcut if it's a minus in the middle. So that's not going to work here. So I'm going to have x squared plus 0, x plus 9. A, B, C. Okay, now if there's nothing there in that A spot, remember that counts as a 1. So it's a 1x squared, a 0x, and a 9. Here we go. X equals negative b, which is a 0, plus or minus the square root. B squared is 0, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is 9. All divided by 2a, which is 2 times 1. Okay, then from there, remember, since we're getting imaginaries, we're going to type in only this part into the calculator. Not the square root, just the middle. So I'll have 0 squared. Really, you could not put that and it wouldn't make a difference. Minus 4 times 1 times 9. So type it in. Make sure you get negative 36 is what I got. Good? Okay, but they're not going to leave that as a negative 36. What are they going to change about that? 36 can split up into what? Two things. 36 and negative 1. And then when I square root each of those parts, the square root of 36 is 6. The square root of negative 1 is I. So I can rewrite my fraction as plus or minus 6i over 2. Now, question. Technically, what's in front of the plus or minus? The 0. Do you care if the 0 is there, though? No, it doesn't make a difference. So you can keep the 0 there or not. It doesn't matter. Okay, from there, if this is a 6 and that's a 2, that can reduce to what? 6 divided by 2 is what? 6 divided by 2 is 3. So you'd have plus 3i, minus 3i, and then what would the third solution be since I pulled that x out to the front at the beginning? 0. So you'd get plus or minus 3i from here, but then you'd have to remember that 0 is your final solution because you had to pull that extra x out. So remove the x, 0 is an answer, then the other two you'll use the formula to find. Make sense? Okay, off of your homework, do you want to do the one that has the cubed in it?
Yes.
Okay, so pull the s out of number 3. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
You put it into a calculator because it says plus or minus. Why do you use minus instead of
Why do you use minus instead of
Oh,
plus?
never mind. I did it.
Yeah, because I'm not typing that part into the calculator because of the I. Okay, so we're going to do number 3. Take the s out. You only have 4 questions. Okay, number 3, when I pull that s out, what's going to be left over? So this is the third question on your homework. So we're taking an s out. So my 3s cubed is now a 3s squared. My 5s squared is now just a 5s. What is left over from the s that was by itself when I pull it out? A 1. You have to leave something in that spot. You can't just pull everything. So when the s comes out, I leave a 1. There's a placeholder. Okay, A, B, C. X equals negative b. What's my b? 5 plus or minus the square root. B squared is 5 squared minus 4 times a times c. All divided by 2a. What's my a? 2 times 3. Very good. Okay, then from here, what part of that are you putting into the calculator? Not the whole thing. Okay, just this part in here. Do you put the square root in with it? No, because if it comes out negative, your calculator's going to tell you there's an error. Okay, so just type in that one part. So it's going to be 5 squared in parentheses minus 4 times 3 times 1.
So it'll be 5 squared? 13.
Yeah, I got 13. Okay, and it's 5 because of the b squared in the formula. So I have x equals negative 5 plus or minus root 13. And then on the bottom, what's 2 times 3? 6. Now, this counts as 2 separate answers. Okay, the plus counts as one answer. The minus counts as the other answer. What's the third answer? 0. Because why? There's an s that I pulled out at the very beginning. That's my third answer. So I would put x equals negative 5 plus root 13 over 6, negative 5 minus root 13 over 6, and then 0 as your third answer. All the other ones, you're just going to get plus or minus, and then the same answer.
Can I see how you print the calculator?
Sure.
Just put the top part outside.
Yeah, I just put the circled part in. Oh.
Yes, you do.
No square root. You put the squared, not the square root. You see it? So it's 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1. It's just that piece.
We don't put all the, okay.
Now, the other thing, too, somebody asked me, well, why can't I just leave that one? Think about 13. What perfect square can 13 divide by? Can it divide by 9 as a perfect square? No. Can it divide by 4? Then you leave it alone. If there's not a perfect square in it, you just leave it. Okay, now, why don't you try number 1? Number 1 has a perfect square in it. So try that one out. What is your A on number 1 if it's not there?
1.
A 1. Okay, yes. So y'all do number 1. See if you can get it. That's right. Okay, so let me get them to catch up. That can divide by 4, though. That's the perfect square in it.
Miss, the one it can divide by 1 and 12 or 20?
1 and 12? No, you can't do a chart on it. You have to do the ABC, this thing instead. Okay, so my A is a 1, my B is a 6, my C is a 12. So x equals negative B, that's a 6, plus or minus, square root. B squared is 6 squared minus 4 times A times C. A is a 1, C is a 12. All divide by 2A, which is a 2 times 1. Then remember, you don't type in the whole thing, you don't type in the square root. Just this little chunk of numbers right here. And what do we get from the inside there when we type that in? It should be 0. Negative 12. Because 6 squared is 36, and then 4 times 2 is minus 48. Okay, so I get negative 12 on the inside, then 2 times 1 here is a 2. Okay, now from here, think about your perfect squares. 9 is a perfect square. What else? 9, 16, and 4, right? Can I divide 12 by 4?
Yes.
So I do 4 times 3 times negative 1, right? 4 is perfect, negative 1 is perfect, 3 is not, but I can reduce the other two pieces. What's the square root of 4? So I have negative 6 plus or minus 2. Root 3, leave it alone. And then what's the square root of negative 1? What letter? I. And then all of that is divided by 2. And then I look to see after I reduce it, if I have a 6, a 2, and a 2, what can all of those guys divide by? 2. So negative 6 divided by 2 gives me negative 3, plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 gives me a 1 square root 3i. And then on the bottom, 2 divided by 2 gives me a divide by 1. And remember, with the 1, you can put it, not put it, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but then also remember, what I'm teaching you for your test tomorrow that you have to be able to do is this step. If you got to there and this crap is confusing, this is ACT, SAT. On your test tomorrow, you won't have to do that. Here's where you'll have to go for your test. Okay, but ACT and SAT, that's going to be on there, so I didn't want to not show it to you, even though really it's more geometry. Okay? You got 2 more left. And then does anybody have some late work for me to pick up? Anybody? Yeah. Can I what? Like that? Yeah. Sure. And then also keep in mind that this is homework 1 because it's going on quarter 2. So this is your first assignment.